The world's energy system is transforming at an accelerating rate. Renewable energy sources are expanding much faster than we expected just a few years ago, and that's great. They're cleaner, of course, but they're also cheaper and more reliable. That means fossil fuels are going to phase out as a major source of energy. Their use is already declining around the world, and over the coming decades, we will stop using fossil fuels for most uses. Now, many people worry, what will that mean for jobs in Australia, given that Australia is a major fossil fuel producer? And some vested interests exploit those fears to try to get government policies to protect or support or subsidize or even force us to use fossil fuels well past their economic life has ended. So at the Centre for Future Work, we've issued a major new report on the employment dimensions of the coming phase out of fossil fuel industries. And it turns out that if we manage this change well, we can do it without any involuntary redundancies and without dramatic disruptions to local communities and their economies. Here's how. First, keep in mind, fossil fuel industries directly employ only a very small share of the total Australian workforce. About 133,000 jobs in 2019, that's 1% of total national employment. So the problem is clearly manageable. In fact, we've experienced many other transitions in employment in our history, both good and bad, that were much bigger than the coming phase out of fossil fuel industries. Second, time is the best friend of any employment transitions. If we announce changes well in advance and establish clear timetables that everybody understands, that employers, workers, and communities can use to adjust and prepare for change, then you give people a chance to make decisions ahead of time and get ready. Then the change occurs gradually and effectively. That's much better than denying and delaying the change until some moment of reckoning at the end, when it will be far more painful and chaotic. Third, fossil fuel workers are older on average than the typical Australian worker. That means most of them are going to retire in the next 20 years as fossil fuel industries are being phased out. That means the downsizing in total fossil fuel employment can be handled mostly through retirement and other forms of voluntary severance, not by having people lose their job. Fourth, keep in mind, Australia's labour market is constantly adjusting anyway. In the course of a typical month, over 600,000 Australians change their jobs. They move into employment, out of employment, from part-time to full-time. They change their occupation, they change their industry. Over 2 million Australians a year change their employment status. That's far, far greater than the total number of people employed in fossil fuel industry. And over a 20-year period of time, the amount of change that will be required to adjust to the phase-out of fossil fuel industries might be 3,000 jobs a year at most. Australia's labour market is large, complex, and flexible, and it can handle that. Fifth, there's a whole range of other growing industries that will create far more new jobs in the coming 20 years than the jobs that will disappear as fossil fuel industries are phased out. Healthcare, construction, education, technical services, other forms of mining and manufacturing. Those industries will create new work and allow our labour market to adjust to the loss of fossil fuel jobs. The bottom line is, if we announce this phase out well in advance, set a long and gradual timetable, say 20 years, support the transitions with generous income supports, early retirement incentives, regional development grants, and other forms of support, it can be done without harming workers and without harming communities. There are examples from around the world of other countries that have done this. Germany, Canada, Spain have shut down entire fossil fuel industries without a single involuntary redundancy. And we can do that in Australia as well. This transition is going to happen, whether we want it to or not. The world is going to stop using the fossil fuels that Australia produces. We can try to deny and delay this change, and that will only make the transition worse, because we'll delay all of the adjustment until some ultimate moment where it will be full of chaos and pain and dislocation. Much better to recognize this change, get ahead of it, and manage it well. Support workers and communities with assistance paid for by the whole country, because this is in all of our interests for this transition to occur smoothly and fairly. We'll all be better off at the end of the day, as will our environment. Please see our full report employment dimensions of the transition away from fossil fuels on our website right here. Thank you.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
Wages are growing at their slower, sustained pace.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.